We'll call this our numbers. Welcome guys. My name's Damien Alberto, this is James Lewin. We're from Physio. James is, as you'll see up here, he's an exercise scientist. He's 18 months away from being a physiotherapist, and we look forward to him being qualified alongside us. And I'm a physio, been doing it for about 20 years now. In my background, I spent a couple of years in Canberra at the AIS. The two sports I've been heavily involved with are volleyball and cycling triathlon. And certainly the last 10 years been mainly cycling, and I've worked with the Australian team and the British team. What we're going to try and do tonight is convert what is usually an hour and a half to 2 hour lecture that I give into 20 minutes. And you'll hear the bell going. That means stop everyone else in 5 minutes more for me, so just ignore that, okay? So we're going to rip through things as fast as we can. We're going to talk a bit about principles of bike fitting and what I think you guys should know, or if you're thinking about getting a bike fit. A bit of the science of cycling. I mean, if you want to get a bike fit, you want to go faster, do you know what makes you go faster? Do you know what makes you go slower? We'll talk a little bit about those sort of things. We're going to talk about what happens if you get an injury, and we're going to talk a little bit about injury prevention and performance enhancement, and what we can do now and more what we can do in the future there. So, we'll talk a bit about the science of cycling and things that go fast, things that make us go fast, and things that don't. So, obviously we're looking at body weight here. Other thing very, very important there is obviously wind resistance. And the third thing that's really important that's changed a lot is technology. Technology of bikes, what we know as physios, what we know in the science of cycling, and the technology on the machines there. So, we'll look through this slide. So we're talking about weight of bikes. And a lot of people in and around Perth overestimate how important weight is, their weight or the bike's weight. Now, we talk about the classic ride around Perth, and we'd say it's probably a lap of the river, I hope you'll agree, or maybe a roll up and down the freeway, depending on what you want to do. And they're pretty close to flat rides. If you take away the Attadale Alps on the other side of the river there, which are really big climbs, we're riding pretty flat there. So if you have a look here, an interesting one to look at, I'll quote this again and again. Some of the people I see get very, very hung up on need to spend $8,000 on a bike because it's a kilo lower than my $4,000 bike, or wherever you might be. So it's suggesting that if you get a bike that's a kilo lighter, and you know how much more you have to spend to go lighter on a bike, over an hour of cycling, you're only going to save a second on the flat. Now that's at 40 k's an hour. You'll see in a sec that the faster you go, the more important wind resistance is. But you can spend a lot of money saving a small amount of weight that won't make a lot of difference to your performance there. This final one down here, most of the climbing we do around here, even on the dams, there's a few steep pinches that are pretty nasty, but a lot of our climbs, even your Whirlpool, your Greenmount Hill, on average from top to bottom, they're not much more than 5%. So wind resistance is still the biggest factor that stops us going forward. You'll see here we're looking at what happens with wind resistance. Now, the really important thing here is it's an exponential equation with speed. So if you're riding slowly, and no disrespect to those who are going to cruise around at 20 k's an hour in 3.5 weeks' time, wind resistance actually isn't very important for you. And we look at that when we think about bike position and bike fitting from our perspective here. I mean, we deal with people again who want to look like the pros in the Tour de France, slam down low at the front, hardcore aero, and they're going out to ride at 20-25 k's an hour. They're in those positions because they're riding up at this pointy end of it here. And when you sort of start looking at that exponential equation, you look at the kind of wattage that you've got to be able to maintain that speed if you're at the front of the group there. Huge wattages to be able to do that. But if you're ticking along at 20, even 25 k's an hour, the wattages are fairly low. The number we sort of talk about is sort of getting into the magic one is around about that 35 k's an hour. If you're starting to ride around that kind of speed, wind resistance is pretty damn important. And that's where, as bike fitters and physios, we start going, okay, how aero can we get you that's not going to compromise your flexibility, your injury history, or potential injuries moving forward, your comfort, and then your power production. And very much when we're talking about bike fitting, it's a careful balance between power production and wind resistance, and then comfort's a factor there as well. We'll talk more about that when we get into it there. So when we come down here, you'll see rolling resistance. So the weight of your bike and you on top combined with tyre pressure and friction, around about 10% is what it's going to affect. Transmission resistance, so this might be going from 105 to Ultegra to Duros or something like that, might change things a percent or so as you start jumping around through there. So I think the overwhelming thing, if you take anything away from tonight in this, it's wind resistance is what stops you going fast, more than anything. Okay? Start going up a hill, it starts getting more important there. Okay? So, we talk about the peloton effect. Now, for those of you who haven't ridden in big groups before, you may not appreciate, but most of us have ridden with someone or behind someone else, and you appreciate how much easier it is to ride behind someone else than it is if you're at the front, particularly if you're pushing into the sea breeze or something like that. Now, so in the right part of a group or a peloton, up to 40% reduction in drag. So you're doing almost half as much work as the guy on the front there. Really, really interesting one that came out of the Tour de France a couple of years ago. So in the Tour, they've all got power meters. It's real-time information going back to the team cars and these sort of things. One of the guys at one of the teams, one of their top guys that are obviously resting in the lead up to a big hill stage, over a 200 plus kilometre stage, he averaged under 100 watts. Now, if anyone understands wattage there, 100 watts is low watts. Okay, any of you could put out 100 watts, tick along all day long there. So now these guys will usually sit on 250, 280 watts all day. So averaging under 100 watts, and that's about being hidden really, really carefully inside that peloton there. So thinking about the dams ride coming up, I mean, there's a few long flat sections, the 20 k's out at the base of Greenmount Hill, and probably when you get back down off the other side of Wollongong Dam and come back along the freeway, you know, if you're an absolute gun and you want to go for speed, no one can keep up with you, you want to be on the pointy end and don't worry about this stuff. But for most of us, sitting behind someone else or working in a group is the way to go to get there with the easiest amount of energy you're dealing with, and get there faster as well. Saddle position, when we start looking at how high or low a saddle goes and these sort of magic positions we try and get people in, it's about getting all of your muscles to work as efficiently as possible. And when we start manipulating different saddle heights, front and back, we understand some basic goals and ideals that we've got, and we manipulate them around these sort of factors here: your strength, your flexibility, and your injury history. So a lot of you have probably had a look at what sort of bike fits around. Who's had a professional bike fit before? Yeah, so there's a lot of different ones around, and we're in a body geometry or BG Fit studio here, so the Wembley guys do a BG Fit. There's Retool that you'll see a few guys using around Perth. BioRacer, TBE had for a fair while, I don't know if it still exists. There's two-dimensional, there's three-dimensional, there's a guy over East, Steve Hogg, who does things differently to everyone else because that's what he likes to do. And then there's a few of the more basic measures there. What's really important to understand is they're all based on the same, I'd say nearly all, because Steve does things differently, they're nearly all based on the same principles here. And that is knee angle and a distance from the front of your kneecap relative to where the pedal is in the front of the pedal movement there, so what we call the 3 o'clock. So somewhere in these kind of ranges through here, all of these systems are still based around. It's the way they're measured that differs, whether it's lasers off a reflector, whether it's using a plumb bob, whether it's using a goniometer, whether it's using a video system where you can then go and draw on it as you see here. They're all still based on roughly the same parameters. A couple of the concerns that we've got with a few of the systems is the range that I allow people to ride in is quite small, and there's some potential errors that can get fed into it if you don't know exactly what you're doing. And even the Retool guys, if you ever go to their website and read a bit about what they say, straight up they say, we are not a fitting system, we're a measuring system. And this we come down here, the key is the fitter and their understanding of what you're doing. And from our perspective as physios, or a physio to be, and James and I work together all the time, if there's pain or injury involved, you need someone who understands what that pain or injury means and how to change it. And no disrespect to the bike shops, and some of them have got a pretty good idea of how to make you feel better on a bike there, but when there's pathology involved, if there's not an understanding of what makes that better and worse there, it's hard to determine where you should put the bike to make it better there. And to a certain degree it can be guesswork, and now and again you'll nail it and get it right there. So I guess that's our own sort of yell at what we do. So what we do, so all that fits, there's a physio involved, so James in 18 months time will be let free to do his own thing, but at this stage everyone, there's a physio involved. And what's really important from our perspective is your past history of injury and your current history of injury there. Goals in cycling is really important there, and the goals are, okay, you can do the 3 dams, the 5 dams, you're a triathlete, how fast are you going to ride? And we ask that not because how much you're going to beat me by, how much am I going to beat you by, but that exponential equation, how important is wind resistance? how important is aero on the bike for you versus James versus someone else? Now James has been a professional triathlete, actually still regularly, I'm cruising, thanks, as a professional triathlete, so someone that sits at 40-45 k's an hour all the time, aero is everything. So that's a very different position to someone else wants to go and do a triathlon, their first triathlon, they just want to finish it, so make them as comfortable as they can there. We then have a look at your flexibility, particularly if there's a history of injury. We have a look at a few strength things as well. We put you on the bike, we have a look at you on the video, we take some measurements, then we sit down and discuss what we think needs to happen there. You go, okay, so you've got crappy stiff hips, you're trying to ride aero, you only want to ride 25 k's an hour, let's make you comfortable. Or, classic one we had today, quite a high level cyclist with a very, very stiff hip, and it's like, okay, we need to get you in a position where your hip doesn't hurt now. Once that's settled down, then we talk about getting aero on fast. So sometimes it's a bit of a work in progress there. So that's discussing the plan. Sometimes we'll make one adjustment and we'll go, oh, that was close when we remeasure. Other times we feel like we go 10, 15 times back and forth on and off the bike to get it right there. Remeasure it, we do a comparison video side by side, which is what these sort of things are here. If you've got flexibility issues or strength issues, we'll give you a bit of homework, and we love bikes. We'll talk about your next bike. And sometimes we're talking about it because the bike someone comes in with is just wrong. It's too long or too short, or, and particularly for the girls, we see it again and again, and not meaning to put guys in problems here, but guys give their wives their ex-bike so they can buy their new one. And we say it again and again, you know, it doesn't matter if you're the same height as your husband. Guys' waist stop here, girls stop here. You know, we're very different the way we're built. So classically, we see girls come in on bikes and they can't reach the handlebars. Because even though their husband's the same size, the geometry is just completely different there. So if I was ever going to give you advice for females buying a bike, look for a women's bike. You know, they build them with shorter top tubes, different shaped saddles, your pelvis is a different shape, different width bars, and the bigger bike manufacturers are doing really good ones. You know, the specialised girls' bikes are ripper bikes, they're really, really good there now as well. So now we talk about the next bike, my classic middle-aged guy who comes in who wants to look like Tour de France guys, has got a shitty back, has got poor hip flexibility, and that's not your bike. Let's get you onto the enduro bike that's going to be more comfortable to ride all day long, because speed isn't a big issue for you. So we're now into the last 3 weeks almost, last 3.5 weeks. What to do if something goes wrong? So everything's been going along beautifully, and all of a sudden you start getting a sore knee or a sore back or whatever's going on there. So ask yourself some questions. Nearly always, if someone comes into us with an injury, with the right kind of questions, we can work out what's changed, what's caused these injuries. Sometimes we've got to probe for a while, or someone goes, that's right, this happened, or oh yeah, I sort of changed my shoes, I didn't think about that. And little things like that, when you're doing a reasonable volume of cycling, because it's so repetitive, little changes can make a big difference there. Certainly with any of our high-level cyclists, the teams we work with, if they have a crash, rule is they have to see us. Not that we're trying to get money out of anything like that, it's because when you get bruised, things tighten up, you start doing things differently, you get some weakness in a muscle, and before you know it, it turns into an injury that we may not see until a couple of months down the track, but that puts them out of the race or something because they didn't have it dealt with early in the piece there. If you can't work it out, ask someone else questions there. If you think you want to try and fix it yourself, you want to play around with your bike, big suggestion, first of all, what are you trying to achieve? Try and rationalise that, and then if you're going to make changes, do them one at a time. You know, what's really, really tricky, you go, okay, I've got a sore knee, I might move my cleats and take my saddle up and move it back. And if it makes it better, well, that might be fortunate, but if it doesn't, you don't know whether all three things you did were wrong, or maybe one of them was right, the other two were wrong. So do them one at a time there, and listen, and time's against you, or if you can't work it out, you know, that's where professionals are important there to get involved with there. And we're going to talk a little bit more about strength and cyclists when I get a chance a bit later in the evening here. Now, injury is the number one cause of riding slowly, there's no doubt about that. And this was a classic, it was in a Kieran race at a World Cup a couple of years ago now, 2013. And so that's a bit of the track. You know, so they hit the ground on the track and it sort of chipped up and went through his leg. He was racing again 4 weeks. So what's interesting, we're involved with Notre Dame University, and we're just starting to look into some more research in cycling. There's very little good research. All the research on what we call the epidemiology or the incidence of injuries comes out of hospitals. And the only people who go to hospital are people who have bad crashes. So we see stuff about facial injuries and upper limb injuries, the most common, because they're the fractures when you land and break collarbone. But what we see in the clinic is overuse injuries. So this is what we see: neck, knees, groin, buttocks, hand and back. And the questions we ask, we sort of start talking about these. Some's pain, some's numbness and that. Certainly for us, the kind of stuff that leads someone to actually come in and see a physio for a bike fit or for physio treatment because of an injury in cycling, most commonly is knee and back pain. It's what stops people being able to ride where they're riding there. So, what happens if you tear a muscle? So all of a sudden you go, crikey, Jeremy's just told me I've got 2,000 metres of climbing to do, I've done hardly any, I'm going to go this weekend and do robold repeats or mount stroke repeats or something like that. So, we start going like crazy, we tear a quad muscle. What do? You don't push through it, okay? Stop immediately. Rehydrate. Hydration is a really, really important factor in muscle tears, also in cramping. So, rehydration really important. The interesting thing about RICE, I'm sure you've all heard of the RICE acronym there, the more we study it, the less it seems to do. So there's no harm in it at all, but do these things if you want to, if you think you feel better from it. ICE will generally take pain away. That's all it's doing as a general rule there. This is important. No anti-inflammatories, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. No anti-inflammatories if there's a muscle tear. It restricts the amount of healing you can get and delays the healing process there. So these inflammatory things coming into a muscle are important for the healing process there. So if you're in pain, use paracetamol or something like that, but not the non-steroidals. So that's your Nurofen, your Voltaren. So hit it with the paracetamol. Okay. As soon as you can, get the diagnosis right. Particularly when time's against you there and you think it's a muscle strain, but it might not be. Because so many of the things we find, if it's a bit of an irritated tendon, which we see very commonly, we can get your strength work on it straight away. Isometric loading means that you load a muscle without changing the length of it. Now, tendons are one of the things that we've changed completely how we manage. 20 years ago, when I graduated from university, we stretched them, we rest them, we ice them, we hit them with drugs. Now we don't rest them, we get them strengthened straight away, we don't put drugs in them more often than not there, and we start loading them up immediately there. But you've got to know what you're dealing with before you can do that. Massage, certainly for tendon issues, will take the tension away and should make you feel better there. For some people it works, for some it doesn't there. Okay, easy cycling until you're pain free. Pushing through pain on these things is just dumb. Unless you've had a diagnosis and said it's safe to push through this kind of thing. Isotonic loading, through range loading, and we start strengthening the other stuff, okay? So you might have torn your quad, nothing wrong with your calf, nothing wrong with your hammy, nothing wrong with your glutes, abs, upper body. You can keep working all those things. And for aerobic fitness, you can jump in the pool, do some swimming, and or hand cycles if you've got access to a gym, one of those things. So you can keep this fit stuff, and then it's the rebuilding phase here.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, come on, it's more than that. So, another one there, you may see a physio who may offer you these kind of things. There is nothing to say there's anything wrong with them, but there's not a lot of strong evidence to say that that kind of stuff for a muscle strain is going to do a whole lot for you there. So I'm not here to put down physios for offering that, but when we look at evidence, we try and use evidence as much as we can there. It's a bit light on those sort of factors there. Avoiding injuries. Number one way of avoiding injuries is not having a crash. Number one way to not have a crash is to understand how you should ride in a group. Understand good bike setup. Make sure you can reach your brakes and the bike's working safely there. And we're going to chat about that a bit more as the night gets on there. Another big thing we're going to talk about later is conditioning. Okay, and there's huge evidence now coming out that wasn't 2 minutes. Huge evidence that strength reduces muscle strains and improves performance. And I'll come through and I'll use this slide in the last one now. So, what's interesting here is the research now shows that stretching doesn't affect your injury risk. However, strength training improves the risk of acute strains by 70% and overuse strains by 50%. It's huge data, and they're good studies with good research there. Very, very quickly this, and I'm going to talk about it a bit at the end there. So this is two groups of cyclists, 20 in each. One group cycle trained only, the other group added in the strength training. They did a 3-hour ride with a 5-minute time trial at the end, so that's like about a 100k race with a 5-minute time trial at the end, or a 5-minute sprint at the end. The guys that only rode their bikes, no change in their power for that. The guys that added 2 strength training sessions a week, 30 watt increase in their power. Anyone who understands power, 30 watts is a huge number. So, we ride strong, we get less injuries, and we go faster. this is what we do. We're very happy to chat more. We're going to be around later on this evening if anyone's got any personal individual questions they want to throw at us there. But thanks for your time. We're moving on. We'll chat to you a bit later on. Thanks, guys.